It all began on one of those slow, quiet Thursday afternoons. The kind where everything feels like it's moving just a little slower than usual. I just finished folding the last load of laundry, my hands still scented with lavender fabric, softener, and finally settled onto the couch with a mug of lukewarm coffee in hand. It was supposed to be my little break, a peaceful moment to myself. Murder, She Wrote was playing in the background, one of those old reruns I never tired of. A guilty pleasure, I'll admit. But just as I was getting comfortable, the screen suddenly flickered, then popped. And then, black dot at first. I thought maybe it was just a loose wire or a power blip. I tried the usual, pressed every button on the remote, unplugged everything and plugged it back in. Still nothing. Just static and silence. Now. I've never claimed to be good with electronics. I can stream a movie and order groceries online, but anything beyond that? Not really in my wheelhouse. That's when I thought of Henry. Henry, my neighbor next door. He'd moved in about 2 years ago after his wife passed. A quiet man in his early 60s, always polite, always wearing that gentle smile. We'd had the kind of friendly, over-the-fence conversations neighbors tend to have, just enough that I felt okay about asking for a little help. I threw on my cardigan, tucked a few flyaway hairs behind my ears, and walked over with my coffee. Still in hand, feeling a little silly needing help with the television. His house looked just like mine, neat, cozy, and with a tidy garden full of those small blue flowers I never remember the name of. I knocked lightly. A moment later, I heard footsteps approaching, slow and steady, before the door creaked open. "Hi, Henry," I said, giving him a small smile. "Sorry to bother you, but I think I messed something up with my TV. And well, I was wondering if you could maybe take a quick look." He blinked, a little surprised, then gave me that kind smile. "Sure," he said. "Let me grab my shoes." Back at my house, he stood in the living room, eyeing the mess of wires tangled behind the entertainment center, while I hovered nearby, trying not to be obvious about it. "You've got half of Best Buy plugged in back here," he chuckled. I laughed, maybe a little too loudly. "That sounds about right. My son set it all up before he moved out, and I've been afraid to touch it ever since." He crouched down, fiddled with a few cables, and within minutes the screen blinked back to life. That familiar theme song started playing again, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "There we go," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Just a loose HDMI connection. An app. What now?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He smiled. "Don't worry about it." I offered him a cup of coffee to say thank you, not expecting him to say yes, really. But to my surprise, he nodded. "Coffee sounds good." We ended up sitting in the sunroom, the one I always kept clean but almost never used. Afternoon sunlight spilled through the big windows, making patterns on the floor. I handed him a mug and sat across from him. "I don't usually come in here," I admitted. "Feels like a room meant for someone else's life." He looked out toward the yard and nodded. "It's nice, quiet," we talked. Nothing big, just little things. About his job, my garden, how strange silence can feel after years of noise. I found out he used to teach high school shop class. He told me the house had been too quiet since his wife passed, that he'd picked up wood carving to fill the space. I didn't say much, just listened. But somehow, that felt like enough. As the shadows stretched across the floor, something shifted. The kind of stillness that feels warm, not awkward. He looked at me, not boldly, not intensely, just gently, like he really saw me, not as a neighbor or a widow, just as me. I felt something in that look, a flicker. I stood up, clearing my throat to break the moment. "Well, I should let you get back to your evening," I said. "Thanks again." I'd have lost my mind without my shows. He stood too, slower this time. For a brief second, it felt like he wanted to say more. But he just smiled. "Anytime," he said. "You know where I am." I watched him walk back across the lawn and close the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment. My heart was beating faster than it had in a long time. It was just a neighbor helping with the TV, wasn't it? But something about it didn't feel so simple. The next few days went by like normal. Grocery shopping, cleaning, a phone call with my daughter. But every time I passed the sunroom or flipped through the TV channels, I thought about Henry. Not in a schoolgirl crush sort of way. More like a favorite tune that plays in the background. Soft, familiar, impossible to ignore. I hadn't expected him to come by again. It was a one-time favor Annie Baller gesture. But on Sunday morning, as I stepped out to tend to my roses, there he was kneeling by his garden, with a trail in hand, wearing a baseball cap a little too big for his head, and humming something. Under his breath I hesitated. He looked peaceful, like someone wrapped in his own quiet world. But then he looked up and caught my eye. "Morning," he said, smiling. "Morning." I echoed, brushing my palms on my jeans. "These lips are coming in nicely." He glanced over at them. "Yours always come in first, must be your magic touch." I laughed, though I felt my cheeks warm a little, or beginner's luck. I still Google how to prune every spring. He stood up and dusted off his shins. "Listen, I was wondering. I made too much stew last night. Would you be interested in helping me get rid of the leftovers? I'd hate to waste it." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to truthfully. I hadn't had company at my kitchen table in a long time, but because anything about his offer felt more meaningful than it should have. Still, I nodded. "That sounds lovely." Later that afternoon, I found myself sitting in his kitchen, a bowl of foam-made beef stew steaming in front of me. The space was cozy, lived in a couple of bare houses. Sat on the windowsill, and photos of his kids and grandkids lined the top of a small hutch. We talked over lunch, and this time the conversation dug a little deeper. He told me about his wife Janet, how they met in college house, used to make peach cobbler every Sunday, how cancer took her too fast. I shared bits about my own late husband, the years of laughter and frustration and cosprim, about the quiet house he left behind, and how the silence had a way of settling into the walls. There was a moment where we just looked at each other. No words, no explanation, just understanding. Two people who had weathered life's storms and were still standing, still showing up, still trying. "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for something?" I asked him quietly, not even sure why the words came out. Henry set his spoon down and tilted his head slightly. "I used to." Then I realized maybe it wasn't something I was waiting for, but someone I swallowed hard. There was nothing suggestive in his tone, nothing forward or pushy, just a simple truth spoken gently, and somehow that made it even more disarming. After I helped clear the dishes, I lingered by the door a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," I said, "not just for the stew, for the company." He gave that soft smile again, the one that didn't try too hard. "You're always welcome here." I nodded, feeling a strange ache beneath my ribs. Not sadness exactly, something deeper, something like hope. As I walked back to my house, I noticed how the wind rustled the trees just slightly, how the afternoon sun had it into that golden glow I always loved. There was no dramatic music, no fireworks, no sweeping gesture, just the faint sense that something had shifted between you, something small but real. And that night, as I curled under my blanket and the TV flickered in front of me, didn't pay much attention to the show. My thoughts were back in that warm kitchen, and with the man next door. The next week brought with it a strange, comforting rhythm. Henry. And I didn't make formal plans. There were no scheduled dinners or pretense of negradities. It was more like a quiet agreement. Some evenings I'd catch him sitting on his porch with his car tools and a mug of tea, and I'd wander over pretending I just happened to be passing by. Other times he'd drop off a few tomatoes from his garden or a slice. Have something he'd baked, banana bread, cornbread, things that tasted like time and care. We didn't talk about what was happening between us, but it was there in the way he'd look up before I even knocked, or the way I'd find myself brushing my hair, or changing my blouse before stepping outside. One evening, just after dinner, he heard a knock on my door. It startled me. Henry usually waited for me to come over, and I found myself oddly nervous as I opened it there. He stood holding a small wooden box in his hands. I was working on this, he said, scanning mine, and I don't know, I just thought maybe you'd like it. He handed it to me with a kind of quiet reverence. It was smooth to the touch, carved from cherry wood with a delicate flower etched into the lid, one of those blue ones from his garden. I ran my fingers over the desert heart, fluttering. It's beautiful, I whispered. Henry, I don't know what to say. He shrugged slightly, but his eyes were full of something unspoken. You don't have to say anything. I invited him in. The house smelled like cinnamon from a candle I'd lit earlier, and the lamps cast a golden glow over everything, making the room feel softer, warmer. Sat in the sunroom again, and this time I brought out 2 glasses of wine. I didn't usually drink during the week, but tonight felt different. Like something deserved to be toasted even if we didn't name it. You're very talented, I said, nodding toward a box. He chuckled. It keeps my hands busy. Helps me think. What do you think about? I asked, not quite looking at him. There was a pause. You said quietly. I looked up, heart thudding. The right was... I don't know what I expected in that moment. Maybe I'd laugh it off, maybe change the subject or pretend I hadn't hurt him. But I didn't do any of that. Instead I said, I've been thinking about you two. We sat in silence after that. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filthy. Air felt heavier charged, but not uncomfortable. He looked at me, really looked the way he had that first day in the sunroom. And this time I didn't look away. You know, he said, voice low. When Janet died, I thought that part of my life was over. Not just the marriage, the connection, the feeling of being seen. I nodded, understanding more than he knew. I felt invisible for years, I confess it, even when I'm surrounded by people, especially. Then actually, you're not invisible, he said softly. Not to me. And there it was again, that quiet truth between us. Not rushed, not forced, just real. He didn't reach for me hand. He didn't lean in. He just sat there with me, sharing the space. The moment, the weight of everything unsaid. Eventually he stood to leave, and as I walked him to the door, I felt something settle in me. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. Before stepping outside, Hephaus turned back. Would you like to come over for dinner? Tomorrow night? He asked. I was thinking of making peach cobbler. I smiled. I'd like that, I said. And I meant it with every part of me. Henry's house smelled like cinnamon and baked fruit when I walked in the next evening. It was one of those soft golden hours, where the sun hangs low and everything outside looks like it's been painted in honey. He greeted me with an apron dusted in flour, and that same gentle smile that had started to feel like home. Dinner's almost ready, he said, but I may need a second opinion on the cobbler. I laughed as I stepped inside. That's a lot of pressure. What if I'm a critic? I'm willing to take the risk. Hesed, his eyes warm and teasing. The table was set simply, no fancy linings. Just 2 plates, cloth napkins, and a small vase of those little blue flowers from his garden. The effort didn't scream romance. It whispered it quietly, respectfully. We talked over roasted chicken and green beans with almonds, thickened of comfort food that tasted like time and care. Conversation came easy now, like old friends who'd finally started saying the things they used to only think. After dinner, he brought out the cobbler, golden and bubbling, with a scoop of vanilla ice cream already melting on top. I took a bite and closed my eyes. Okay, I said, pretending to be serious. This may be the best peach cobbler I've had since 1994. Henry laughed. I'll take that as a win. When moved to the licking room afterward, where the lights were low and an old jazz record played faintly in the background. I sat on the couch and he sat beside me. Not too close, but closer than before. We didn't talk much, we didn't eat too. There was a comfort in the silence, a kind of peace that comes when people stop pretending they're strangers to each other. At one point he turned to me, voice soft. I hope this doesn't sound foolish, but I like being around you. It feels easy, right? I looked at him for a moment, a faint lines around his eyes at the way. His hands rested calmly in his lap. The man who'd shown up in small ways that had somehow changed everything. It doesn't sound foolish, I said. It sounds true. He reached out then, not boldly, not dramatically, just offered his hand between us. Palm up like a question, I placed mine in his warm, steady familiar. We sat like that for a long time. No rush, no need to name anything. Eventually I leaned my head on his shoulder, and he let out a breath. I didn't know he'd been holding. Outside, the world continued on cars, passing a dog barking in the distance, the last birds calling it a night. But inside it felt like time paused just for us. A few weeks later things didn't change. Overnight, we still lived in our own houses, still had our own routines. But now there was a quiet thread tying our days together. Morning check-ins, shared meals, the occasional awe over how much I still didn't understand about HDMI cables. There were no declarations, no big promises, just presence. And oddly that felt like a now, more than enough. One afternoon I was sitting in missing room, the wooden box. Henry resting on the windowsill. I had filled it with old letters and photographs, pieces of a life that once felt far away, but now somehow closer. I watched the sunlight hit felled, bringing out the grain in the wood. Flower carving, catching the light. I thought about how unexpected all of this had been. How a broken TV had led to a conversation which led to a meal which led to something quietly extraordinary. Not a fairy tale, something real. And at this point in life, real is far more precious than. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories.